Hello and welcome to Early Evidence, a podcast by the Moving Minds Alliance, where research meets reality in the world of early child development in crisis settings. I'm your host, Dulguun, and I'm delighted to be back with our second episode. A bit about us: the Moving Minds Alliance is a global collaborative of philanthropic funders, UN agencies, regional networks, NGOs, and research institutions, all united in advocating for better outcomes and equity for young children affected by crisis everywhere. Through this podcast, we bring you insights from research, practical experiences from communities, and conversations that matter, because when it comes to building a better future for children in crisis, evidence and action must go hand in hand. Today's episode drives into a very powerful and timely theme: child development. We're asking a big question: why does early childhood development matter in peace building? And more importantly, can nurturing care, inclusive education, and responsive systems help reduce our long-term harm and foster social cohesion in the world's most fragile settings? I'm joined by Dr. Friedrich Affolter, coordinator at the Global Education Cluster, co-coordinated at UNICEF and Save the Children. Dr. Affolter, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have you on Early Evidence. To start us off, could you share a bit about your background and what drew you into the intersection of peace building, education, and early childhood development, particularly in crisis and emergency contexts?
Thank you. Yeah, it is a combination of mandates, which one is not always lucky to have. But in 2012, the government of the Netherlands had approached UNICEF with a challenge. They were saying, UNICEF, you are doing excellent emergency response work, but what you're actually doing to prevent catastrophes from happening in the future? For example, if we have big emergency operation to help of conflict, this is laudable work, but can you also leverage your social services which you're providing, for example, or wash or nutrition, in such a way that future conflicts and future hazards and catastrophes will be prevented? Was the birth of the Peacebuilding Education Advocacy program, where we were thinking, can we leverage education to prevent conflict again and again in the future? And because of that, we were also then interested in looking whether early childhood development programs can be leveraged not only to promote early childhood development, but also strengthen social cohesion. And this is kind of introduced to the topic where we are looking at social services in emergency contexts with the mandate to also strengthen social cohesion.
Thank you so much for sharing about the history of your work and your background, as well as the intersection of peace building, education, and early child development. To go a little more back into your background, Dr. Affolter, what's one surprising or fun fact about you that people actually will guess when they first meet you?
Fun fact about myself?
Yes, please.
I think it is the experience of being exposed to challenges where we are providing education not only for the sake of education and for honoring a child's right to education, but to see that education, in addition, is being leveraged to strengthen relationships between individuals, between groups, and also between communities and government institutions. I think this is a very unique and relevant way at education or other social services, that we are not just delivering services, but by delivering services, we are having the opportunity to strengthen or to transform relationships. This is, I think, one of the most exciting challenges of my life, and I'm very happy to share this challenge with other colleagues who are interested in looking into social services and peace building.
For our listeners who may be not very familiar with the type of work that you do, could you please explain what UNICEF does exactly at the intersection of peace building and early child development, and how the organization contributes to the matter of building peace through early child development?
UNICEF has the United Nations have a mandate to contribute to peace. Peace is a very big word. We have to conceptualize peace building really means and what we can achieve simply with social services, because the root causes of conflict are very often result of grievances and tensions, but they're also the result of political tensions and or of disasters or of wars where we as social service providers do not really have control over it. But we know that very often conflict is not only resulting from macro political polarizations, it also results communities being upset and furious. They're not being given access to services like health, like education, like water, so that their children can grow up healthy capacities, so that they have a chance to contribution to their communities and to escape from poverty. So this is where UNICEF and actually also the work of many NGOs is coming in. We are not just providing a service to help, providing services to strengthen equity and equality, to give communities who are marginalized, who are vulnerable, a chance to strengthen, to have a better chance for the future. Then we need to ask ourselves, we do not only want to give communities services, strengthen social capital, which strengthen city resilience, and which prevents conflicts and crises, which, if they are not being prevented, weakening community infrastructure, communities' resilience, health of caregivers, health of children. Therefore, we have a responsibility as agencies like UNICEF to not only ask ourselves whether we are providing the services which are in demand, but whether we are providing our services in ways which are conflict sensitive. Because we might actually provide services in ways which really enhance inequality. Some privileged groups continue to receive services while other groups never receive services. Some groups receive a certain type of services while other groups don't receive services which are more tailored to match their needs. So we have to be conflict sensitive in the way we are providing services. We have to do it in consultation with groups, and we have to such a way that it creates collaboration rather than rivalry and competition. So this is why UNICEF and other agencies have a responsibility to plan programs in ways which are conflict sensitive, strengthen cohesion, help communities to not only acquire capacities and skills, but at the same time also strengthen the relationships between each other.
Share, please, an example from a local community you work with or a country program, or even a moment in your career that illustrates what it looks like when early child development and peace building are meaningfully integrated.
Well, there were various programs during the Peacebuilding Education Advocacy program, which actually leveraged early childhood development for peace building. I think the most popular was childhood development in Ivory Coast, where in communities there was polarization between different ethnic groups, some which had been long-term present in Ivory Coast, and some which had only in recent decades arrived when, during a resource boom in Côte d'Ivoire, country attracted foreign labor into the country. And then when the economy collapsed, those people from other ethnic groups did not return back to their countries of origin. And as resources dwindled, there was competition and resentment between those communities. And political parties, as it happens very often, are kind of capitalizing on tensions between community groups. They are trying to attract votership by speaking negatively about other groups, and that can lead to enhanced tensions between groups. And in those communities, the community relationships between the two ethnic groups or two or three ethnic groups had deteriorated to such an extent that people could not even leave their homes anymore. They could not bring their children, have a neighbor to watch them, because there was so much distrust and fear that one group would hit against the other. And in this context, UNICEF and Caritas approached the leadership in the village because we were aware that there was needs for early childhood development services. And UNICEF basically negotiated with the leadership that we are willing to provide these early childhood development services, but those early childhood development services have to be available for everyone, not just members of one group. And there was at the beginning a lot of resistance from the dominant group that only children from one group should be given access to these services and not to others. But this was kind of negotiated, and eventually the community agreed that children, all ethnic groups, would be allowed to benefit from this kindergarten. And then as mothers brought their children to this kindergarten and they had free times, the mothers were invited for literacy classes. And in those literacy classes, mothers did not only learn about reading and writing, but they also had time to discuss other issues which were plaguing the community. And of course, child well-being, child health became a topic of interest, and the women learned about promoting the well-being of their children. They also discovered that they had joint interest in doing business together. They also discovered they had certain issues on how to manage family relationships, including husbands, and they became friends, and they started to work together. Came the result of many, many working relationships among women, where women groups became actually peace-building force within the community. And as women of different ethnic groups worked together and they had their children in kindergarten together, they could do literacy classes together. Eventually, they were also able to talk with their husbands about why do we have these differences in the community. And they became an engine in the community, and it kind of spread quite quickly, became so prominent that even political parties who originally buy people and give them party memberships and incentives in order to get political support for polarizing political agenda, they started to approach those women because they realized those women were leaders and they were hoping to have political benefits from having those women join parties, which they very often refused. So in a sense, it is not just about early childhood development. It was the early childhood development service and bringing children together and letting children benefit from the same services, freeing the time of caregivers so that they could connect through educational services where they would learn about child well-being, child health, but also business initiatives and literacy. That eventually spilled over into influencing leadership, influencing the man and the community. They joined forces. They became one, so to speak, despite the fact that the climate in the government the political climate in the government was the opposite, where the people were still very much full of suspicion, distrust, and actually very adversarial against one another. So this is one, but we also had other projects like in Myanmar, for example. There were always grievances from ethnic minorities that they could not teach their children in their mother tongues. And UNICEF and the government of Myanmar, there was a few years back, negotiated a mother tongue policy so that where community members and members from the administration would explore how mother tongue learning could be included into the national curriculum. And there was a recommendation to change policy, which unfortunately was never realized because of the change in the system. But it was a proof that mother tongue negotiations between community members and government administration for the benefit of effective and efficient early childhood learning can be used to strengthen cohesion and trust between communities and the government and between communities themselves. And we had many, many other projects where governments had no good or an apathic relationship with communities by offering to establish services on early childhood education with participation of communities were able to establish trust and collaboration between communities and local governments so that we had vertical cohesion and we had horizontal cohesion. So these are very, very good examples to demonstrate the early childhood development programming can be leveraged not only to strengthen early childhood development, but to also strengthen social cohesion. We cannot promote early childhood development without investing in the health child and the nutritional status of the child, protecting the child against neglect and abuse, and making sure that the child will receive the age-appropriate stimulation. And we know that all the social services are services for which there's demand from the community. People ask for it. And this is it. This is why it is an opportunity to then leverage it also to strengthen cohesion. Now, in emergency response, when you have a disaster or a crisis hitting, when there's a rapid onset shock, all you can do is providing services, protect children from the immediate consequences of deprivation of services. But the longer the crisis continues, crisis eventually becomes protracted. And when, as a result of the crisis, there's also competition for resources, and maybe communities are going against one another because they're all competing for resources. It is important to provide services which are integrated, which contain all the different sectors which you just mentioned: health, nutrition, child protection, education. And you have to develop it in such a way community manages those services together. And very, very often crises are protracted and people are not able to emerge out of the crisis. They are waiting for services to be provided over and over again. Eventually there will be no more services provided because it's not sustainable. So we must find ways that communities participate in the provision of the services, and local authorities, they need to enable communities to provide services, and donors and agencies must support these communities with supplies and services, but in such a way that not some are being privileged or are benefiting more than others.
When it comes to funding programs in early child development focused on emergency. If you could speak directly to funders who are not traditionally involved in humanitarian or international development work, but want to support early child development programs and projects in crisis settings, what would be your key messages to them? How should they approach this matter?
I think donors and funders, because they have money, they can actually also demand conflict-sensitive programming. There is now, especially in the current times where humanitarian funding is drastically being reduced, there is an emphasis on localization, there is an emphasis on resilience, and there is an emphasis on multi-sectoralism. So if we want to have localization, have community-owned early childhood development programs. If you want to have multi-sectorality, demand that we are not working in sectoral silos. And education, for example, is very often deprioritized because there is an argument that education is less life-saving than health nutrition. But we need stimulation as much as physical health. We need to have not only biological survival, we also need cognitive survival. So it is an opportunity actually for service providers, for NGOs, for funding recipients to argue to donors that we want to have a multi-sectoral early childhood development program where we are working the areas of child protection, health, nutrition, and education, to do it together with communities. And we want to strengthen community resilience by engaging communities and local authorities in this program together. It actually fits all the criteria which in the humanitarian reset are being stipulated as important. And by the way, it benefits caregivers. There are more female caregivers than male caregivers when it comes to early childhood development. But we should always also emphasize the importance of fathers when it comes to early childhood education and psychosocial stimulation.
So I have a different question regarding the theme of the 2025 International Day of Peace, which is themed as Act Now for a Peaceful World. What will action look like when it comes to peace building through early child development? But based on your observations more so, which actors need to step up looking at the current situation in early child development and international development cooperation? and what should be done differently to make a lasting impact in building peace through ECD programs and projects?
It's a very difficult question because funding is dwindling, but I would like to see more efforts to collaborate with governments to create risk-informed policies that endorse vision of social services. It is not just providing services, but it is investing in social policies, forge a partnership between government and civil society organizations, provide services with communities and with NGOs in order to provide education, health, nutrition programs, which are needs of populations, but which also strengthen collaboration and community endorsement. There are quite a few projects in the world where it is communities have developed caring support services and social responses for their communities. Like, for example, the Kondugwa project in the Central African Republic is a project where communities develop discussion groups where they decided about how to meet their social needs. And they very, very often discovered that there's a big demand for early childhood development services and for caretaking services, and is rose to the occasion, and they supported one another within the neighborhoods, established early childhood development programs where people supported each other, and it became so successful that actually the Ministry of Chad of Central African Republic became aware of it, and they started to document, and they took notes, and then they presented the Kondugwa project at international conferences like in Nouakchott, and then the government of Chad became aware of this program, and they're now trying to pick up on this, to introduce a similar community model also in communities of Chad. The interesting thing was a community initiative where unities developed solutions to satisfy the need of social services. And it became so successful, it spread to different communities, and that it eventually influenced policy, and that it was even presented to policymakers of other countries. So I would like to see effort where positive grassroots experiences influence policies, and then that those policies are being used to support back the grassroots.
So my last question to you is, Friedrich, are there any emerging practices, research areas, or partnerships that you found particularly exciting or transformative?
What gives me most hope?
Yes.
What gives me most hope is the enthusiasm of the people on the ground when they are developing solutions by themselves, and they see that those solutions work. They are developing a drive and enthusiasm and pride in running those solutions. Those solutions are very often quite practical, quite cost effective, and they should be nurtured. One has to be very, very wise in how to support these initiatives, because sometimes money can be a spoiler, but seed funding is also necessary. Promising projects to prosper and to spread. I have seen many inspired projects developed by outsiders have also been successful, but if they don't connect with the spark of the community, they are dying again off after a few years. So we are facing times where humanitarian funding is depleting, but where the problems are not going away. And I believe in the genuinity of communities. They have the needs, they have the desire to act, and they have the drive to sustain it. So this is this hope, the enthusiasm on the people on the ground.
It's been a great privilege speaking with you, and I know our listeners will take away so much from this conversation. That was Dr. Friedrich Affolter, coordinator at the Global Education Cluster, co-coordinated at UNICEF and Save the Children, sharing insights on how early child development can be a cornerstone for peace building, even in fragile and conflict-affected settings. If this conversation sparked ideas or inspiration, we'd love for you to share it. Pass it along to anyone who might be interested in early child development in emergencies, because the more we connect, the stronger is our joint impact. I'm your host, Dulguun Batmunkh. This podcast was produced by Lola Ayanda for the Moving Minds Alliance.